to teach. So here's the thing. The class, I've never done them because you have to pay for them, and I'm not going to pay for them because I don't get any economic incentive to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to pay for something and then get no return. But they're free, and I love school, and I love it, so I'm doing it. Like I think myself and one other person have been the only people that have showed up for every single Zoom meeting. Yeah, because I love school. Anyway, so what I don't have done because of that, and I will also tell you, those of you that I showed it to Mrs. Greggs and she laughed, I'm fairly certain that my professor, even though she is a professor of history, wrote the book on citations. My literature review that I turned in, I had 20 comments on a 3-page paper, which really freaked me out. But of the 20, only 3 were actually about my content. The other ones were telling me that I didn't need a space there. The comma goes here. This should be a period instead of a comma. Not in my paper. Not in my paper. In my citations. Like, how do you see that there should be, that I put 2 spaces instead of 1 space? Seriously, one of them was, this should only be 1 space. Seriously. So that's a little bit freaky. And then last of my little freak out, before we get into the new deal, is we had to pick a research topic fairly soon within beginning of the course, like within the first 2 weeks. So I picked something that I really liked, that I was really interested in. That was what I knew. It's what I tell students, like, don't pick something you like because you're going to spend a lot of time with it. So I picked something that I really liked. It shouldn't be a shock to you that I picked a massacre. But after the fact, I found out that my professor has written a book about it. Yeah, she wrote a book about it.
She doesn't know too much.
What?
She doesn't know too much.
I know, right? That's what yeah.
You use her book?
I have used her book. What did you say?
Oh, I said plagiarize it.
Yeah, no. Did I already tell you that she looks at the citations like an eagle eye? No, I can't. I got it. I'm on page 7. I got my rest already in my head. It took me that long just to do my citations. All right. So here's what our schedule is going to look like this week. You guys are gone tomorrow for SAT. I'm not giving you anything tomorrow. Wednesday, you will have stuff. So those of you that blow off Wednesday, and there's about 13 of you that do it all the time, and the other of you, it's always the same ones that never look on Wednesday. You have stuff on Wednesday. You're going to have stuff on Wednesday, every Wednesday until we take the exam. On Thursday, I'm going to start giving you some things that are assignments for review. So that, again, will be added into what we're doing. A couple of them, again, I always think these are fun, are podcasts, which I love podcasts. They're only a half hour. They don't take a lot of time. You can listen to them while you're doing other things. But you will there are assignments that go with them, which make them not as fun podcasts as it would be just to listen. The first sets that we're going to look at are court cases, those Supreme Court cases that you have to remember. We're going to go all the way back to Marbury versus Madison and Worcester versus Georgia, those ones that you need to know. All right, so we are ready to move really fast in the next, 5 class periods through the Great Depression, leading up to World War II, and then World War II itself. Sadly, again, World War II, we don't spend a lot of time on it because we don't have a lot of questions about war in it of itself. What we will do is what we always look at with war: how did we get there, turning points, and then ending points. For World War II, the ending points are very significant and very important because we end World War II and we go immediately into the Cold War. And that will be how we'll end. We're going to end with Cold War and Civil Rights Movement. Those will be the 2 things that we're going to end the course with. We're going to try and track those 2 things parallel. And that will be hopefully where we get to by the time we take our exam. So the first thing we need to look at is we got ourselves into the Great Depression, and we had Franklin Delano Roosevelt elected as president. So background on Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, is he is a Roosevelt, and he is cousins to that Roosevelt. He's born into a very wealthy family. He, like his cousin, will be Undersecretary of the Navy. He will be a vice president with the Democrats in 1920. Most significantly and most importantly is on that first page, struck by polio. So 1921, as an adult, he gets polio. So for those of you that obviously don't, I shouldn't say, don't and haven't ever known anyone with polio, polio affects your musculature, and you lose the ability for many people to walk, in some cases to even breathe. It is a deadly disease. It is a disease that runs rampant through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. They would close things in the summertime. In the 1960s, Jonas Salk gives us the polio vaccine, and then eventually it becomes a little sugar cube and then a little drop of medicine. I have no idea now how you guys get the polio vaccine. But many people recover without any problem. Many other people become paralyzed. And that's what happens to FDR. He loses the use of his legs, and from 1921 forward, he is confined to a wheelchair. Here's the significant and important part of this, and it is one of the things that is really important to understand as we move through the modern presidency and as we move through modern media. Journalists never, ever, ever, ever take pictures of him in a wheelchair. For the most part, none of the population, the citizens of the United States, know that he is using a derogatory 1920 term, a cripple, because had they known, he probably never would have been elected president. The idea of electing someone who does not meet all that criteria of strength and stamina as a symbol of the United States just would not happen. And just so that you know, here's another my granny story. I tried to tell my granny many times that FDR had been in a wheelchair. I wish she'd quit lying to me. You know, the devil's going to split your tongue if you keep lying at me. I'm like, Granny, I'm not lying. He had polio. He couldn't walk. And that's how much the journalists at the time revered the office of the presidency and worked very diligently to never show him in a sign of weakness. So that's two things. One, the place where the United States was in dealing with people with disabilities, and how the idea of just the fact that you were in a wheelchair needed to be hidden in order for you to become president. And secondary, the relationship between politics and journalism at that time. Yes.
See, that's what I understand. It's because I thought like the yellow press loved stuff like that.
They do, but not for the president, not for the office of the president. We don't really lose this aura about the office of the presidency until President Nixon, when President Nixon takes us to a dark place. But no, none of the press. There are pictures of him in a wheelchair. They do exist, but they never were published at the time.
Divided like it is now.
Nope. Oh gosh, no. Nope. So he has braces on his legs, big heavy braces that he uses. There will be a couple of movie clips that show him walking, but if you really watch, what he's doing is dragging his legs, and there is someone on either side of him helping him. That, again, is to say that it takes nothing away from his tenure as presidency. He will be elected president 4 times. He serves 3 and I think a year before he dies in office. And a lot of the contributing factors to his death is the toll that it took on him in getting the United States out of the Depression, and then secondary into World War II, the fact that his disease, polio, was debilitating enough, and that he was a chain smoker and drank martinis pretty much nonstop. That's why he and Winston Churchill were best friends, smoking buddies and drinking buddies. He was the governor of New York in 1928, 1930. And he is, again, and at A6, political savvy and conciliatory. A lot of that probably has to do with his disease, working around his disease, understanding disease. Franklin Delano Roosevelt will start the March of Dimes. Those of you that are familiar with that, it really starts with dimes, collecting dimes for people and children with polio. So he, again, has a really important legacy in many ways in the United States as presidency and just as a citizen. It also helps when you marry someone that is just as awesome as you are, and that would be Eleanor Roosevelt. She is really the first lady that we think of as a first lady. She is the niece of Teddy Roosevelt. Her last name already was Roosevelt, so that's always awesome when you don't have to change your name. Yeah, she's a Roosevelt. They're all.
So like he married his sister's kid?
No. They aren't that close. They are not that close.
There's still
They're cousins. They're all cousins, but yeah, they're not that close. She is a niece of Teddy Roosevelt. She is a niece of Teddy Roosevelt on that side, but not on the other Roosevelt
I've
side.
never heard you say. I've never heard you go. Oh, yeah, no, that's not good.
Anyway, so she becomes a really important part of getting us out of the Great Depression. She becomes the conscience of the New Deal. She herself publishes a syndicated newspaper column. Syndicated means it shows up in several newspapers around the United States. She lobbied extensively for her husband, championed causes for women, children, poor, and African American. The most active First Lady in American history. That has not changed. There has not been anybody since, even the ones that you know, that even come close to Eleanor Roosevelt. And she, again, is an important helpmate to her husband, both politically and physically. In 1932, the Democratic representative of the Democratic candidate for president is Roosevelt. I pledge myself to a new deal for American people. And so this time period becomes known as the New Deal. And again, the idea is getting us out of the Great Depression. It is a somewhat vague, contradictory campaign, again, all of those things. And what happens is Roosevelt easily defeats Hoover, 472 electoral votes to 59. Hoover only wins 6 states. That is how much the American population is dissatisfied with not just Hoover, but also the Republican Party. This is also a big star moment when African Americans move from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party, and historically have stayed with that Democratic Party over time, except in the 60s with the South, where they have to make their own, where Southern segregationists have to make their own Democratic Party called the Dixiecrats. And African Americans will become a really important part of the Democratic Party. So the 20th Amendment on the bottom of page 2 is we finally change when presidents come into office, and it is as a result of the Great Depression. So traditionally, election had been in November, and presidents did not take office until March, which that is a really long time. It's called also a lame duck time period because the president is either voted out of office and has zero power. And so what happens with the 20th Amendment is we change it to January 20th. The reason it had been March for so long was travel. It was very difficult in the early times of our country in 1800 to travel in the wintertime. And so we made it March to make it a little bit easier for traveling. So the 20th Amendment changes our inauguration date to January 20th. And we also, in the middle of that, repealed the prohibition with the 21st Amendment in 1933. The effects of the Great Depression, we kind of talked and hit on that at the end. 25 to 33% unemployment. The larger cities, larger urban areas were on that high side of 33%. 25% of banks failed. And again, that means if you had your money in one of those banks that failed, your money was gone. Your savings, everything you had, even if you did not participate in the stock market, even if you weren't affected by the Great Depression, if your money was in one of those banks, your money was gone. Farmers, 25% of farmers lose their farms. Large numbers of businesses will fail. And E cannot be minimized. It is the loss of self-worth. It's, again, this idea of not being able to care for your family, not being able to provide, or the fact that you lost all of your money in the stock market. So in comes Roosevelt with his New Deal and his first inaugural address, which even if you don't know who said this, I am hoping that somewhere in your 17 years of life, you have heard this. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. That is FDR, and that is what he is saying as Americans. We can get through this. The only thing that we fear is fear. Nothing else can hold us back. And so what he does is he creates this brain trust of this inner circle. He picks experts, and please note that one of those experts is a female. This is the influence of Eleanor Roosevelt. In 1932, Frances Perkins becomes the first cabinet woman as a Secretary of Labor. And note that she is not given a cabinet position without any kind of significance or importance. Secretary of Labor, when you have a 25% unemployment rate, is incredibly important. It is going to take a long, long, long time before there is another woman cabinet member. Seriously, long time before there is another woman cabinet member. Also, look, under E, his wife. She doesn't have a title, but she is considered a member of his cabinet. And again, that's the significance of her on her husband. So we have what's called the first 100 days. In modern time, it is a way that we view and rate presidents is what have they done their first 100 days. This is another thing that happens under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is a serious event that he is thrown into, and he makes this deal to the people. The first 100 days, I am going to take action. These are the things that I'm going to do. And the first thing is relief, recovery, reform. Those are the 3 R's. Relief comes first, right? We've got to put money in people's pocket. So again, that relief is short term. Relief, food, temporary work, and then recovery is to reform those abuses, those that had led to the Great Depression, and then finally reform, making sure all of those things are fixed. So on the top of page 4, progressive ideas, unemployment insurance, old age insurance, a minimum wage, conservation, development of natural resources, restriction on child labor. We are bringing back all those progressive ideals again. An unprecedented passage of legislation in U.S. history gave the president an extraordinary amount of power, and in his first 100 days, a lasting legacy on the nation. His programs are now called the New Deal. Historically speaking, we call this the alphabet soup because they all have initials. You are not expected to remember all of them, but I will point to the ones that you should know, one of which will be Social Security. Social Security Administration is created in and under President Roosevelt. So the first thing that he has to take care of are banks. Very much like what Alexander Hamilton says, if we don't have a sound bank, we have a crisis system. And so what on page 4 Roosevelt does is declares a banking holiday from March 6th to March 10th. So every bank in the United States of America was forced to close March 6th through March 10th. During those 4 days, the banks were required to do their due diligence, their accounting, their checks and balances, and they could only reopen on March 11th if they were solvent. So what that means is the banks had to sit with all their deposits, all their debits, and do all of their accounting. And if they had more assets than debts, they could open. If they did not, they could not open. And as you see, most of the banks were able to reopen. So that does check one. It gives the United States citizens the idea of a sound banking system. And again, this goes all the way back to Alexander Hamilton. This idea that American citizens need to understand and need to have a sound banking system for credit purposes, for depositories, all of those things. Takes the nation off the gold standard on March 6th. Private holdings of gold were surrendered to the Treasury in exchange for paper currency. So we are off the gold standard. This is one of those things that both populists wanted, progressives wanted. Check mark. Roosevelt does it. He also is going to convince the rest of the world to do it too. Congress responded by canceling gold payment. 1934 reduced the value of gold. All of those things. And then at the bottom of page 4, emergency banking relief gave president power to open sound banks after 10 days, merge or liquidate unsound ones, forbid the hoarding of gold. On the top of page 5, I would put a box around number 5, because this is what, again, endears Roosevelt to the population, tells or allows Roosevelt to ask his citizens to do very difficult things. And why will they do that for him? Because of these fireside chats. Now, we don't have TV yet. We're really close, very, very close. But everyone has a radio in their house. Roosevelt becomes the first president to regularly speak with his constituents. And they're called fireside chats because that's what they were. They weren't campaign speeches. They weren't speeches about why you should vote for. It was him sitting and talking. Assured Americans that it was safer to keep money in banks, so people go back to banks. These fireside chats become the legacy, again, of all presidents in addressing the populace. Most presidents do it weekly. President Trump didn't do it as often, but most presidents have a weekly radio that is broadcast on all radio stations for anybody that ever wants to hear it. Confidence in the banking restored. Deposits now outpace withdrawals. Homeowners loan, refinance mortgages so people did not lose their homes. Banks saved monies as foreclosures were prevented. And 6C, please look at that. Middle class loyalties shift to the Democratic Party. We are now shifting as a result of Roosevelt fixing these problems. We start shifting loyalties. On page 5 in the middle D, Securities and Exchange Commission, known as the SEC, which is still in function. They are designed to protect the public against fraud, deception, and inside manipulation of the stock market. The SEC still exists. It's still their job, and they still regularly seek out people who scam the Exchange Commission. The bottom of page 5, as part of relief and unemployment, we get the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. This was founded March 31st, 1933. It is the most popular New Deal program. Why? Because it does a lot of things. Number one, 2.75 million young men between the ages of 18 to 24 are given jobs. So the jobs that they are given does 3 things. One, it keeps them out of trouble. right? That jobless core of young men that have a tendency to maybe move in the wrong direction when they don't have a job, they don't feel a sense of self-worth. So the government hires them, and they do a couple of things. They reforest, so they do reforestation, they firefight, they do flood control, swamp drainage, they build national parks. I would bet in and around Indiana that in Jasonville, that Shakamak was heavily built by CCC. The workers lived together in mess halls, barracks. They have a very strict schedule. It was very much like a military. The most important thing was their money and their pay was sent home to their families. So that was significant. Those 18 to 24-year-old men did not get their pay. Their pay went to their families, which is why it was a widely popular part of the New Deal. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration, created in May 12th, headed by Henry Hopkins, gave $3 billion to states for direct dole payments, or preferably for wages on work projects. And this, again, the dole was being like you were given on a handout. So you had Civil Works Administration. These are people that are going to make raking leaves, sweeping streets. And then we have the two really important ones. The Public Works gave the government, state and local governments, $4 billion to provide jobs on building projects, building schools, dams, refurbishing government buildings. And then the Works Progress was, again, employed $9 million on public projects such as buildings, bridges, hard road surface, airports, all those things. And then the Federal Arts Project, part-time work for high school, college students, actors, musicians, etc. So the next big one that you need to remember is on page 7. Agriculture. Agriculture Adjustment Administration, AAA, attempted to eliminate price-depressing surpluses by paying growers to reduce their crop acreage. These are subsidies. The United States government still has subsidies that they provide to farmers, and the goal of subsidies are either to keep costs down and allow maximum profit for farmers, and as a side, to allow people to afford food. Do what? What? I'm sorry, I still did. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Part of the controversy of this comes with what the federal government does with things. So several million pigs were purchased and slaughtered instead of giving them to people on relief. Criticized for destroying food when thousands were hungry. Where's my next one? Federal Loan Act. And then on the middle of page 7, put a box around 3, the Dust Bowl. So sometimes, if you've never heard the old saying, when it rains, it pours, this is what the 1930s was. It was not just raining and pouring, it was monsooning. We had several different events occur all at one time. And one of them was the Dust Bowl. So the Dust Bowl is a separate event that occurs inconveniently in the middle of the Great Depression. It starts late 1933 when a drought is going to strike in our mid-plains states. And this drought will be severe. This drought will be like years and years and years long. Like Oklahoma is going to go almost 4 years without any rain. Coupled with the fact that we took into those Great Plains states agricultural practices that we used in mid-Atlantic states, and it doesn't work well. What had happened over time is that area lost its topsoil. The reason that it had that dense, dark soil was because of the sod. And as we begin developing that agriculturally, we remove that thick sod. it allows the topsoil to blow away. So agriculturally, that area protected its topsoil by growing this dense grass. When we removed that dense grass, there was nothing to hold that topsoil down. And that topsoil is necessary for agriculture. So what happens without that dense stuff to hold it down is it blows. And if you've ever been in the interior part of the United States of America, the wind howls. It blows like crazy. One, because there's no wind breaks. There's nothing to break that wind. Time for a song. Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plains. That's what it does. It sweeps. And so it blows all of that topsoil. And in blowing the topsoil, two things happens. It removes the part of the soil that's necessary to grow. And two, it creates dust storms. It is really hard to describe a dust storm if you've never been in a dust storm. In the panhandle of Texas, where I lived in junior high, dust storms were great with a great regularity. So much as in California, which is one of the reasons why we moved, kids have smog alerts and you can't go outside and play, which is full stop. I'm not raising my kids in a place where there's a smog alert where they can't go outside and play because the air is so bad. This is America. Why do we have air that we can't send our kids out to play? So we moved from that. We had the same thing in Texas where the dust storms were so bad we couldn't go outside and play. I think I've mentioned this before. When we had the dust storms, our school buses would pull our sidewalk went right into the building. The school buses would pull right up to the door so we didn't have to walk out. The sand would go up your nose, down your throat, in your eyes. You couldn't see. It was gritty. It felt like sandpaper rubbing across your face. The dust storms were horrible, but not as bad as these dust bowls. Please look, millions of tons of topsoil were blown away as far as Boston. Do you guys read Grapes of Wrath? I don't think you read Grapes of Wrath. It is what? Okay, you already did?
Yeah.
Okay. It is, for those of you that like to read, it's a really thin book. It is an awesome book about this time period. And what happens is, especially in Oklahoma and Arkansas, thousands of these Okies will migrate to Southern California. It is really, and especially in the part of Southern California where I'm from. So it is a really interesting thing, and we'll end there. But you can just listen to me talk. Does anybody, or has anyone ever heard of the show Hee Haw before?
Yeah.
Hee Haw. With Buck Owens, who is from Bakersfield, California. Not a Southern place. Because all of these Okies move into Southern California and bring all their Oklahoma stuff into Southern California. And what chapter did you guys read in Grapes of Wrath?
Like, the one with the turtle.
The what?
The one with the turtle. It's like chapter.
Oh, why that one? That's a weird one.
Symbolism.
Yeah, it's symbolism.
Well, there's lots of symbolism in that book. The weirdest symbolism is the very last page, which I can't even talk about because it's so weird. It's a really good book. It's a very thin